William the Conqueror, born in Falaise, Normandy, around 1028, arrived into a world that would dictate the course of his life, and consequently, the destinies of both Normandy and England. History would remember him as the man who indelibly altered England, the warrior king whose ascent began from the humblest and most improbable beginnings. However, before the conquest, before he wore the crown, and before his legacy reshaped medieval Europe, he was simply a boy born out of wedlock, a child with seemingly no claim to power, who would nonetheless become one of history's most imposing rulers. William's father, Robert I, Duke of Normandy, was captivated by Herleva, a tanner's daughter. Their relationship, considered illegitimate by noble standards, resulted in William's birth, who was swiftly branded William the Bastard, a title that would dog him throughout his youth. Many in Normandy doubted such a child could ever inherit the duchy. But Robert recognized a fierce quality in the boy, a determination, an inner strength, and an indomitable spirit. Thus, he designated William as his heir before embarking on a pilgrimage from which he would never return. When William was just 8 years old, Normandy descended into turmoil. A child duke was vulnerable in a land teeming with ambitious nobles, rival clans, and power-hungry warlords. Conspiracies ignited like sparks in a storm. Several guardians tasked with protecting William were assassinated, and castles became scenes of conflict. Factions battled to control the boy, whose bloodline they either questioned or scorned. Yet, against all odds, William survived not by chance, but through a resilience that would come to define his rule. Growing up amidst such chaos hardened him. He quickly learned that loyalty was fleeting, trust was a rare commodity, and power belonged to those bold enough to seize it. Surrounded by those who wished him dead, William matured rapidly, absorbing lessons that few children could withstand. The boy who witnessed allies fall and enemies grow bolder began to grasp that destiny was not inherited. It was taken. By his teenage years, William had already become a formidable young leader. Those who underestimated him paid a heavy price. With the assistance of key allies like his uncle Walter and the influential Archbishop of Rouen, William gradually restored order to Normandy. He forged alliances, quelled rebellions, and demonstrated to the nobles that he was no longer a child hidden behind the vestiges of a crumbling regency. He was a warrior, a strategist, and a rightful duke. By age 20, William had solidified his control over Normandy through sheer resolve and military skill. He possessed a keen understanding of the land, its people, its politics, and the battles that forged a ruler. Normandy became his training ground, the proving field where he cultivated the discipline, patience, and ruthlessness needed to lead an army, govern a nation, and eventually lay claim to a crown across the English Channel. Before England entered his sights, however, another pivotal event occurred: his marriage to Matilda of Flanders. Their union was controversial, opposed by the church, and criticized by the nobility. Yet, it evolved into one of the most robust partnerships in medieval history. Matilda would later govern Normandy in his absence, proving herself a capable and powerful leader as William pursued greater ambitions. The turning point came in 1051 when King Edward the Confessor of England, a distant relative who had been raised in Normandy, purportedly promised William the English crown. Edward had no heir, and the ties between Normandy and England were strong. Whether motivated by gratitude, strategy, or desperation, this promise planted a seed in William's mind, a seed that would blossom into a vision of empire. However, England was not a land that would passively await a foreign ruler. The English nobility harbored their own ambitions, and the most powerful among them, Harold Godwin's son, would subsequently assert his claim to the throne. The stage was set for a confrontation that would redefine an entire kingdom. As William fortified Normandy and augmented his wealth, largely through land holdings and military influence, his fortune reached unprecedented levels. Later, following the conquest, he would possess nearly all the land in England, amounting to approximately 60% of England's GDP, thereby becoming one of the wealthiest individuals in recorded history. But that part of the story would come later. For now, William was a young duke, hardened and ambitious, and forged by chaos. His childhood had left him with scars, but also with a burning drive. His rise was not a miracle. It was a product of determination, survival, and an unwavering sense of purpose. Each threat he overcame Each rebellion he crushed prepared him for the destiny that awaited him across the vast and unpredictable sea. The boy once scorned as a bastard was evolving into something far greater. The world simply didn't know it yet. William's claim to the English throne was not merely born of ambition. It was a culmination of decades of political alliances, promises, and familial ties woven across the English Channel. By the early 1050s, William had transformed from a child duke fighting for survival into a formidable ruler whose power could no longer be ignored. Normandy was stable, prosperous, and fiercely loyal to him. And England, just across the waters, was a kingdom teetering on the brink of uncertainty. Much of England's instability stemmed from the aging King Edward the Confessor, who lacked an heir. Edward had spent much of his youth in Normandy, amidst William's ancestors. He admired the Norman system of governance, and some accounts suggest he felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the Norman dukes who had protected him during his exile. It was during this period that Edward supposedly promised William the throne of England, a promise that would one day ignite one of the most consequential conflicts in medieval history. But the crown of England was never destined to fall easily into foreign hands. The English nobility, particularly the powerful Godwin family, had their own aspirations. Harold Godwin's son, the most influential nobleman in England, positioned himself as a natural successor. He was strong, wealthy, tactically astute, and deeply connected to England's leading families. For Harold, the notion of a Norman duke claiming the English throne was intolerable. William, however, believed he possessed both a legitimate claim and divine sanction. To him, Harold was a usurper, a man who would break sacred oaths to seize a crown that was not rightfully his. Before the conflict fully erupted, the two men actually met. Around 1064, Harold traveled to Normandy under circumstances that remained debated. Some suggest he was on a diplomatic mission, while others claim he was shipwrecked and forced into Norman territory. Regardless, William received him with honor. During Harold's stay, William asserted that Harold swore an oath, before holy relics, to support William's claim to the English crown after Edward's death. This oath would later become William's most compelling justification for the invasion. When King Edward the Confessor died in January 1066, Harold was crowned king almost immediately. For William, this was not simply a political betrayal. It was a personal affront and a direct violation of what he considered a sacred promise. William viewed the coronation as an act of treachery, and treachery demanded war. But before William could invade England, he needed more than just an army. He needed legitimacy. He needed the church on his side, the nobles unified behind him, and the resources to launch one of the largest amphibious invasions of the medieval era. William's first move was to court the church. He argued that Harold had broken a holy oath sworn on sacred relics. The Pope concurred. The papal banner, a symbol of divine approval, was granted to William. This transformed his campaign from a mere political conflict into what many medieval Christians perceived as a righteous cause. Next, William turned to Normandy's nobility and beyond. He promised land, titles, and wealth to any knight willing to join him. Men from Normandy, Brittany, Flanders, and even parts of Italy answered his call. William's reputation as a strong and just leader made knights eager to follow him into battle, and the promise of English land sweetened the deal. William was not merely a resilient survivor. He was a master organizer. He oversaw the construction of a massive fleet. Hundreds of ships built to transport horses, soldiers, supplies, and siege equipment across the English Channel. This was no simple military expedition. It was a logistical marvel, rivaling any medieval operation of the era. But even as William prepared, England faced its own threats. Harold Godwin's son had to defend his newly acquired crown from multiple enemies. To the north, Harold Hardrada of Norway, a legendary Viking king, also laid claim to the English throne. England was caught in a triangle of danger: Norway to the north, the Normans to the south, and internal instability throughout the land. For William, this was the perfect storm. For Harold, it was a nightmare. In September 1066, the Viking invasion struck first. Harold marched his army north, fought the brutal Battle of Stamford Bridge, and emerged victorious, but at a terrible cost. His army was exhausted, bloodied, and far from the southern coast. William seized his moment. On September 28, 1066, William's fleet landed at Pevensey in southern England. The Normans established a base, secured supplies, and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. William was described as calm, confident, and resolute, a leader who believed destiny was finally within reach. He also brought with him the secret to his future wealth, the understanding that whoever controlled the land controlled the kingdom. This concept would later make him the effective owner of nearly all land in England, giving him wealth equivalent to 60% of England's GDP, placing him among the wealthiest individuals in human history. But before he could reshape England, he had to conquer it. As Harold and his exhausted forces raced south to confront the Norman invaders, the stage was set for a battle that would define England for centuries to come, the Battle of Hastings. The world was about to witness the clash of two men, one defending a crown and one determined to claim it. And William, hardened by a life of struggle and survival, marched forward with the confidence of a man who believed he was chosen not just by fate, but by God himself. From the pivotal Battle of Hastings, where William secured his victory, we now transition to the period following it, a time when true control over England was far from assured. Conquering a kingdom on the battlefield was one thing. Ruling it, reshaping it, and ensuring the loyalty of its people to a foreign king was an entirely different and far more complex challenge. William's resolve will be tested more severely in the years following 1066 than during the invasion itself. This era was characterized by resistance, rebellion, harsh punishment, significant transformation, and the commencement of one of the most sweeping political reorganizations in medieval Europe. Following his triumph over King Harold II, William anticipated that the English nobility would readily acknowledge him as their rightful ruler. However, England was not a land that could be easily subdued. It was a complex realm with proud Anglo-Saxon traditions, powerful lords, and regions that had long resisted centralized authority. Numerous cities submitted, motivated by fear of destruction, but their allegiance was superficial, fragile, and often coerced. The North, in particular, emerged as a bastion of defiance. William's response to this resistance was resolute and often brutal. While he preferred diplomatic solutions when feasible, he was determined to prevent rebellions from destabilizing his new kingdom. In 1067 and 1068, several uprisings erupted as English nobles sought to expel him, and foreign powers, such as Norway and Denmark, saw an opportunity to reassert their influence in England. William found himself contending not only with discontented English lords, but also with a multinational coalition that viewed him as a usurper. The most infamous wave of resistance unfolded in northern England. The Northumbrians, renowned for their independence and fierce pride, refused to accept a Norman king. They assassinated Norman officials, burned outposts, and rallied around surviving Anglo-Saxon leaders. William's anger was boundless, and the response he orchestrated became one of the darkest episodes of his reign. The harrying of the North. Between 1069 and 1070, William launched a series of campaigns that devastated the North. Villages were burned, crops were destroyed, livestock was slaughtered, and thousands perished from starvation during the harsh winter that followed. This strategy was designed not merely to defeat rebels, but to crush the spirit of resistance entirely. Historians continue to debate the scale of destruction, but all accounts agree that it left a profound scar on northern England, one that persisted for generations. For William, it was a necessary evil to prevent foreign powers from using the North as a staging ground for reinvasion. Once the rebellions were suppressed, William turned his attention to reorganizing England. He systematically dismantled the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, replacing them almost entirely with Norman lords. This was more than a political strategy. It was a complete restructuring of land ownership. William granted vast territories to those who had supported him, creating a new Norman ruling class whose loyalty was directly tied to the king. The result was unprecedented. By the end of his reign, William personally owned more land in England than any ruler in Western Europe at the time, and his vassals controlled nearly everything else. England became a kingdom where authority flowed directly from the king. This realignment extended beyond land. William introduced Norman castles, fortified stone structures unlike anything England had seen before. These castles were not merely military defenses. They were symbols of dominance. Towering above towns and countryside, they served as constant reminders of Norman authority. The Tower of London, perhaps the most famous example, was initiated under William's orders. Castles enabled William's new lords to maintain order, deter rebellion, and project power with unprecedented efficiency. Another transformation occurred through administration. William was meticulous, even obsessive, about governance. He imposed Norman laws alongside existing Anglo-Saxon traditions, eventually blending them into the early foundations of the English common law system. He required strict oaths of loyalty, reorganized taxation, and developed a network of sheriffs who acted as the king's direct representatives. Through these reforms, William created a centralized monarchy that was far stronger than the one he had conquered. But William was more than a conqueror. He was a shrewd diplomat. He maintained control of both England and Normandy, navigating a precarious balance between his new kingdom and his ancestral homeland. The kings of France feared his growing influence, and neighboring lords often attempted to undermine him. Yet William managed to keep both realms stable, using alliances, strategic marriages, and military intimidation. Despite his strength, his reign was not without personal struggles. His relationship with his eldest son, Robert Curthose, grew strained as Robert demanded autonomy over Normandy. Their conflict escalated into open rebellion, leading to battles between father and son. William suppressed a revolt, but never fully repaired the relationship. This internal tension would later shape the future of the Norman dynasty. Throughout these years, William's power and wealth continued to expand. His landholdings became so vast that, by historical estimates, his personal fortune equaled more than half the GDP of England, a level of wealth unmatched by almost any ruler in medieval European history. Yet he did not indulge in luxury. His lifestyle was disciplined, at times even austere. He spent much of his time traveling, inspecting castles, overseeing governance, and ensuring the loyalty of his nobles. By the late 1080s, William had transformed England. The Anglo-Saxon ruling class had vanished, replaced by a Norman aristocracy. The political landscape was reshaped, the economy reorganized, the military strengthened, and the kingdom brought firmly under centralized authority. Still, William felt the need for even greater control and accuracy in administration. This desire would lead to one of the most remarkable achievements of his reign, one that changed history and left a record still studied today, the Doomsday Book, which will be covered in the next section. The third phase of William's life, therefore, was defined by conflict, consolidation, and transformation. Through force, strategy, and administrative genius, he reshaped an entire kingdom. England would never again return to its Anglo-Saxon past. Instead, it entered a new era, Norman, centralized, and deeply marked by the will of a determined conqueror whose influence remains visible nearly 1,000 years later. From the establishment of William's rule over England, we now turn to the period in which it was firmly entrenched, yet far from peaceful. With rebellion subdued and Norman authority permeating the land, William pursued something even more ambitious, a complete and detailed understanding of the kingdom he had conquered. This ambition for absolute administrative control would drive him to create one of the most extraordinary documents in medieval European history, the Doomsday Book. However, before this monumental achievement, William faced new challenges, both political and personal, testing the resilience of his reign and the durability of his empire. By the late 1080s, William commanded unparalleled power. Norman castles dominated the landscape, the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy had been supplanted, and the English church had undergone substantial reform under his supervision. Yet governing a kingdom as vast and diverse as England demanded more than military strength. William needed precise knowledge. Who owned what, how much land produced, how wealth flowed, and where royal taxes could be increased. He desired a kingdom not just conquered, but fully measured, catalogued, and governed by logic rather than tradition. This mindset distinguished him from many rulers of his era. In 1085, amidst the threat of a Danish invasion, William ordered what seemed an impossible task, a complete survey of all land in England. Royal commissioners were dispatched across the kingdom to record the name of every landowner, the size of every estate, the number of livestock, mills, meadows, forests, and even the economic value of each property. Nothing escaped scrutiny. People liken the survey to the Last Judgment described in the Bible because no one could escape being recorded, hence the name Doomsday Book, signifying the Day of Judgment Book. The Doomsday Book was revolutionary. It became the foundation for taxation, legal disputes, land rights, and royal administration. Even today, historians marvel at its precision. It provides a unique snapshot of medieval England, a testament to William's obsession with order. Through this document, William succeeded where no previous English king had. He established a comprehensive, centralized system of governance based on accurate data, ensuring his power extended into every corner of his kingdom. But William's reign was not defined solely by administrative brilliance. Even with his dominance over England, he remained the Duke of Normandy, bound to the turbulent politics of France. His responsibilities doubled, defending Normandy from rebellious lords while maintaining stability in England. The King of France, Philip I, viewed William with suspicion and fear, regarding him as a rival too powerful for comfort. Normandy became a battleground of influence. Alliances shifted constantly. Rivals sought to undermine William, and the king had to travel back and forth across the Channel repeatedly to protect both his realms. Meanwhile, tensions within William's own family continued to cause turmoil. His eldest son, Robert Curthose, long discontented with his limited authority, repeatedly clashed with his father. Robert believed he should already be ruling Normandy. When William refused to grant him full control, Robert rebelled, garnering support from disaffected nobles. Their conflict escalated into open warfare, son against father, each commanding knights and soldiers. William defeated Robert, but the emotional wounds remained. Their relationship deteriorated beyond repair, creating lasting fractures within the Norman dynasty. This family conflict would later have profound consequences for the future of England and Normandy, especially after William's death. Despite these troubles, William continued to govern with relentless determination. He maintained a strong military presence, built additional fortifications, and reorganized the English economy to increase royal revenue. Under his rule, England grew more stable, prosperous, and centralized than it had been in centuries. The country's laws were strengthened, trade expanded, and townships developed under the new Norman order. Yet this prosperity came at the cost of cultural transformation. Anglo-Saxon traditions faded, replaced by Norman language, architecture, and administrative methods. England was becoming something new, something William had engineered through force and calculated reform. But time had begun to take its toll. Years of campaigning left William physically heavier and increasingly prone to illness. Still, he refused to rule passively. In 1087, after a series of border raids from the King of France, William rode into Normandy to defend his lands. Although the campaigns were relatively minor compared to his earlier wars, they marked the final chapter of his military life. During one of these operations, William's horse stumbled as he rode near the French city of Mantes. The saddle struck his abdomen with great force. The injury worsened over weeks, leaving him in severe pain. Soon, it was clear the great conqueror was dying. William was taken to a monastery in Rouen. Surrounded by monks, priests, and a few loyal advisors, he began to reflect on his life, his victories, his brutality, his ambitions, and his regrets. He confessed his sins, acknowledging the harshness of his campaigns, especially the harrying of the North. He ordered that wealth be distributed to the poor and to the church, hoping to cleanse his conscience before death. His final decisions shaped the future of both England and Normandy. William divided his territories among his sons. Robert Curthose would inherit Normandy. William Rufus would become King of England. Henry, the youngest, received only money, but would later seize the throne through ambition and intelligence. On September 9th, 1087, William the Conqueror died. The monks prepared his burial in Cannes, but even in death, chaos followed. A fire broke out near the ceremony, scattering mourners. Worse still, William's body was too large to fit into the stone tomb prepared decades earlier. When attendants forced it inside, the corpse ruptured, filling the church with foul odor. It was a humiliating end for a king who had shaped the destiny of nations. Yet history remembers him not for his death, but for his impact. He changed England forever, politically, culturally, linguistically, and economically. His legacy would echo for centuries. From the apex of William's reign, we now approach the twilight years of a ruler who reshaped England more profoundly than almost any monarch before or since. By the late 1080s, William was no longer the fiery young duke who had charged into Battle of Hastings. He was older, heavier, burdened by conflicts with his sons, and constantly torn between his two realms, Normandy and England. Yet his power remained immense. His wealth, derived largely from the land he owned across England, was unparalleled. According to contemporary chroniclers, virtually no patch of English soil existed that did not provide William with income, soldiers, or loyalty. As age began to take its toll, William focused increasingly on solidifying the legacy he would leave behind, recognizing that the stability of both realms depended on his decisions. One of the most defining actions of William's later life was his commissioning of the Domesday Book in 1085. Although the survey was partly motivated by military concerns, William feared a potential invasion by Denmark. It also reflected the mindset of a ruler determined to bring complete administrative clarity to his kingdom. The Domesday Book meticulously documented lands, livestock, mills, fisheries, payments, obligations, and property rights. It was more detailed than anything Europe had witnessed in centuries. No king before William had ever attempted to catalog virtually the entire wealth of a nation. To William, this was not simply bureaucracy. It was an exercise of power. With the Domesday information, he could levy taxes with precision, resolve disputes authoritatively, and ensure that every noble owed him exactly what was due. But while the kingdom appeared stable on paper, the internal tensions within William's own family grew more severe. His eldest son, Robert Curthose, felt perpetually marginalized and believed that his father unfairly withheld the Duchy of Normandy from him. William was a man of boldness, ambition, and often driven by impulse. While William admired his son Robert's courage, he was also frustrated by his lack of self-discipline. Their disagreements escalated into open rebellion when Robert, backed by several Norman nobles, amassed armies against his own father. William ultimately suppressed a revolt, but the intense conflict left deep emotional wounds that would linger. This bitterness between father and son cast a long shadow, influencing the future of the kingdom even after William's death. Despite these family struggles, William maintained a firm grip on power. His military reputation remained formidable, and he continued to lead campaigns when necessary, even in his later years. One of his last significant conflicts involved France. King Philip I of France, an old rival, mocked William for his weight gain, reportedly quipping that William's pregnancy was slowing him down. Enraged by this insult, William launched a retaliatory campaign into French territory. It was during this campaign, in 1087, that he suffered the injury that would ultimately lead to his demise. While riding through the burning town of Mantes, a town he had ordered to be set aflame, William's horse stumbled. The king was thrown violently forward against the saddle pommel, resulting in severe damage to his internal organs. He was taken to Rouen, where he remained bedridden for several weeks. As he felt his life force ebbing away, he turned his attention to addressing the unresolved issues within his family and his realm. Knowing he could no longer govern both England and Normandy from beyond the grave, he made arrangements to divide his territories. Normandy would be inherited by his eldest son, Robert Curthose, while England would pass to his second son, William Rufus. His youngest son, Henry, received a substantial monetary inheritance but no land, although fate would later intervene and make him king. In his final days, William expressed a mix of regret and unwavering resolve. He acknowledged the harshness of his rule, admitting that his efforts to maintain order had often resulted in suffering. Yet, he maintained that he had acted in accordance with the responsibilities of kingship, to provide stability, defend the realm, and ensure justice as he understood it. Chroniclers of the time described the scene in his chamber as solemn. The once mighty king who had conquered England and ruled with iron fist was now confronted with the fragility of human life. William the Conqueror died on September 9th, 1087. What followed was a chaotic reflection of the divided loyalties within his domains. As his servants fled the room, some even stealing valuables as they made their escape, his body was left unattended. When his funeral finally took place in Cannes, the ceremony was disrupted by an unexpected an unsettling incident. A local man interrupted the service, claiming that the land on which the church had been built had been illegally seized from his family. The monks were forced to negotiate with him on the spot in order to proceed with the burial. Adding to the grim spectacle, when William's large body was lowered into the stone sarcophagus, it became clear that the tomb was too small. As the monks struggled to force his body into the confined space, it burst open, filling the church with a repulsive odor. Medieval chroniclers interpreted this gruesome event as symbolic. The powerful king whose presence had once dominated Europe could not even be contained neatly within his final resting place. However, William's legacy extended far beyond the drama of his burial. In the decades that followed, the political, economic, and cultural structures he established profoundly shaped England in countless ways. He reorganized the feudal system in England into a highly centralized hierarchy, with the king at the undisputed apex. The redistribution of land created a Norman ruling class whose descendants would exert influence over England for centuries to come. Even the English language underwent a transformation, absorbing thousands of Norman French words and evolving into a new and distinct form. William's extraordinary wealth, estimated by some modern comparisons to be equivalent to around 60% of England's GDP, stemmed from his almost complete control over land. No king in English history, either before or since, has personally owned so much of the country. His rule transformed land into the primary source of political and military power. Moreover, his conquest permanently tied England to the European continent. While later rulers would redefine this connection, the Norman conquest initiated an era in which England was more closely integrated with continental affairs and rivalries. In conclusion, William the Conqueror is remembered not merely as a conqueror, but as a nation builder. He reshaped political systems, transformed the aristocracy, and fundamentally altered the culture of England. His reign was characterized by both harshness and extraordinary administrative skill, as well as a remarkable long-term vision. When people today speak of medieval England, they are often envisioning a world molded by the institutions and structures that William created. Few rulers have left such a lasting and profound impact. And so concludes the story of William the Conqueror, a man born a bastard, who rose to rule two realms, changed the very course of English history, and whose power and wealth made him one of the most influential figures of the medieval world.